I struggle to adjust to my new life as Alpha. 𝐸𝐥𝐼 comes back to haunt us, bringing with it his brother Liam, who was lost for years. And just as we're dealing with this family surprise, a brutal murder shocks the pack, forcing me to confront the harsh realities of leadership. Chapter 1. The winter had passed without me even noticing. Gone were the skies of marbled grays. Now a soft blue glow hovered above me, simmering through the fluffy white clouds. Blossom delicately lined the trees like frosting on a cake, in pale pinks and creams. There was a kiss of coldness in the air. However, this only heightened the warmth of the sun's rays. Its tree, previously bare and bracken, was now clothed in bright green leaves, sprouting from every branch and stretching beneath the illuminating sunlight. "So this is where you run off to all the time," a warm voice hummed behind me. I could feel his presence looming over me as I kept my gaze on the headstones in front of me. Freshly cut flowers lay before them, in an attempt to brighten the dim gray granite. There was a cruel sense of irony to the stones, their youthful strength and unwithered body, while they represented the perished and deceased. Something new that would last forever to mark something that's already ended its life. "Sweetheart." His deep voice sighed sympathetically as he neared my hiding place and saw what I saw. But I wasn't sad. They were together. Maybe not physically, but in spirit they had been reunited and their graves were side by side, just like they always wished. "How did you find me?" I asked him, never shifting my gaze from the stones. The gold italics swirled along them, reminding me of all they were and all they meant. "I tracked your scent to the river and then heard you whispering," he admitted, taking a seat on the dew-covered grass beside me. His proximity was enough to increase my body temperature to an unhealthy reading. I finally turned my head to face him, the man I was completely, head over heels in love with. His caramel-colored locks had grown slightly since I first met him, giving him more of a wild, rugged look. A perfectly straight scar shot through his left eyebrow from his fight with Alpha Dean a few months ago. Beneath the perfectly sculpted brows, except for the scar, were his breathtaking eyes. The cool, crystal sapphires glowed with small emerald flecks shimmering in the sun's rays. His body was still largely built, even larger than it was before after all the training and working out he did. His bulging muscles and chiseled chest still made my mouth water. Overall, his boyish charm and manly handsomeness made me fall in love with him all over again. But at this moment, what turned my heart to complete goo was the sweet smile that contorted his face. Small dimples appeared in the hollow of his cheeks and tiny crinkles outlined his eyes as he grinned sincerely. It was rare that it wasn't a smirk or a mischievous grin that shaped his lips, but when it was a genuine smile, I melted on the spot. "Are you okay?" Zach asked me, his voice manly and deep yes. He raised his eyebrows and shot me the daring look I had become so used to. "You know you are supposed to be in school right now," he reminded me sternly with a hint of a smirk on his soft lips. "So are you," I challenged, grinning widely at him. "I am 19. I finished school a year ago." His eyes twinkled in victory and I let out a huff. "Did you actually go to school?" I asked him, realizing there was so much I didn't know about this guy. Over the last month we had gotten to know each other better. Not having any major drama to distract us now, Alpha Dean was deceased and his son was actually one of my close friends. He was the alpha of his own pack and we helped each other become strong leaders. Zach shrugged. "I did, but I had to keep moving, so I never stayed very long." He gently pulled me closer to him, snaking his arm around my waist. The warmth of his skin pressing against me caused me to melt into his strong hold. "So, are you going to tell me why you aren't in school?" he asked, staring down into my eyes. I shrugged my shoulders lightly, resting my head against Zach's. "I have other things to do." His lips pressed firmly against my forehead, resting there for a while before he pulled away and cradled my head against his chest. His long fingers threaded through my thick, wavy locks. Over the past few months, they had grown rapidly and now tumbled down to my waist. While I hated the extra time it took to wash as well as style, Zach insisted I leave it long. "How long have these been here?" he asked me quietly after several moments, referring to the sturdy stones I was staring intently at. "I bought a headstone for my mom a few years after she went missing, when I finally gave up waiting for her to come back. Dad didn't know, but I placed it here. Somewhere I come when I need space or I need her," I explained to him. "And Dad's? I bought a few weeks ago. I wanted them to be together." I shrugged and he nodded in understanding. Our hands curled together between us and his skin was warm and comforting. We didn't speak another word to each other, simply relaxed in the other's company. However, not long later, a faint trembling pulled us from our bubble of solitude, and soon, small droplets were spotting on the ground around us. The sky had glazed over with a steel gray color and the glaring sun was concealed by the rain clouds. "We should head home," Zach stated, pulling himself to his feet and reaching his hand out to me. I placed my own hand over his and it was immediately enveloped in his soft, warm skin. He gently tugged me up to my own feet and shrugged his jacket off his shoulders. Seconds later it was draped over my own, providing shelter for me while Zach's plain white shirt soaked through, clinging to his skin and emphasizing every muscle. One of his strong arms curled around my shoulder and guided me away from my solitary place, the lake I visited when I needed to be alone. Nobody knew about that place, not my mom when I was little, not my dad and none of my friends. It was my safe place amongst the storm, and yet I was happy to share it with Zach. He led me all through the forest, ducking under the shelter of the trees along the way, avoiding the now heavy rain. Birds overhead squawked, flapping through the trees to find shelter. Their sodden feathers made their wings heavy, much like my sodden clothes made it difficult to walk. Hastily, we trudged along muddy pathways, our shoes squelching along the way. The smell of pine and wet dog wafted through the air, mixed with the scent of Zach's cologne and a sense of longing and a feeling of home sunk in. Once we finally reached my home in the center of the village, Zach ran ahead to unlock the door and we both bundled into the dry. We aimed straight for the living room and in seconds, Zach was lighting the fire to warm us up. The beautiful glowing flames flickered delicately, reminding me of the ceremony at my father's funeral. My eyes locked on the oranges and yellows, watching them dance. Tears pricked my eyes at the bitter, sweet memory. While the ceremony itself was beautiful, the occasion was bleak to say the least. "So what have you actually been doing while I was training?" Zach positioned himself on the sofa beside me and pulled me closer to him, apparently noticing the shift in my mood. "Just sorting through the office. I found a box of some diaries my mom kept and my dad had more paperwork than he had personal belongings." I laughed solemnly. It was so typical of him to remove unnecessary belongings but keep several copies of every pack member's file. "Need help sorting through them?" Zach offered, tucking me further into his hold. "No, it's okay." I snuggled into him with a small smile. "Thanks," I whispered, reveling in the warmth and comfort he provided. He ran his long fingers through my matted, dripping wet locks. For what? For everything. Chapter 2. After a long warm shower, I dried my hair quickly with the dryer and made my way back downstairs. Zach was leaning against the counter, with his arms folded across his chest. He handed a large mug of hot chocolate with cream layered on the top and marshmallows sprinkled with chocolate pieces. Thanks. I smiled at him as I took it out of his hand. We sat, in content silence, for a while before my phone chimed on the counter between us. Hello? I answered, not bothering to check the caller ID. I currently receive calls from every member of my pack, so saving numbers would be tedious. Hey Elle, there is someone trespassing on the borders. Tyler, my beta wolf, informed me. Okay, thanks Ty. I will be there in a minute. Can you go ahead and check them out? I asked him, wanting to finish my drink before heading back out in the cold. While I was showering, the rain subsided, but a strong, crisp wind swirled through the valley, whipping up debris off the floor and catapulting it through the air. Yeah, see you in a minute. He ended the call abruptly, and I knew it was because he was already halfway there. Tyler was an amazing beta, and although he was skeptical about how ready I was for the position of alpha when my father died, he had helped me out loads over the past few weeks. I let out a frustrated groan and downed the rest of my drink, scolding my tongue in the process. I have to go, I huffed, tugging my coat off the hook. I heard, stay safe, okay, sweetheart. Zach responded in a pleading manner. He pulled me towards him and pressed his lips firmly against my forehead. I planted a quick kiss on his lips in return before scurrying down the hall. I will, I called and slipped out the front door. Outside, the cold wind whipped my hair to and fro, matting the dark waves over my face. I tucked the strands behind my ear and progressed forward, heading in the direction of the border. Eventually, I came across Tyler and a few of the protection wolves gathering in a circle. Tyler's sharp voice could be heard over the howling wind and was directed at the man before him. His hair was a pale shade of brown, almost copper, and was windswept over his head in a messy but neat flick. It looked purposeful, yet some of the hairs were fly away from the wind, adding to a wild look he seemed to pull off with ease. To thick and heavily hooded eyebrows arched over his piercing blue eyes. Those cold eyes locked onto me as I approached him, and a sense of familiarity went coursing through me. His scent was a concoction of wet dog and burning embers, and it created a feeling of warmth within me. He had a bulky build, with broad, squared shoulders that indicated he was ready to fight. However, upon seeing me, he visibly relaxed, which boiled my blood. His muscular arms were currently being contained by the protection wolves, keeping him captive until my arrival. Who are you and what are you doing on my territory? I asked sharply, not in the mood for light chit-chat with the trespassers. He smirked slightly, and I couldn't stop the scowl from erupting on my face. Hey sweetheart, I am here to see the alpha, he stated casually, relaxing somewhat in the wolf's arms. I'm the alpha. What do you want? I snapped, and his expression morphed from cocky to shocked. His eyebrows shot through his forehead, brushing against his hairline. His crystal blue eyes were as wide as saucers, and his mouth drooped in the corners. You Ray, the fearsome alpha reed that took over from the ruthless father a few months ago. He gasped incredulously, and I nodded. But he stuttered slightly. But you're a woman. I am, I answered with a nod. I thought women couldn't be alphas. He furrowed his brows, looking me up and down as though he was waiting for me to morph into a man at any moment. That was a ridiculous tradition that dated back 1,000 years. I snapped, narrowing my eyes. Now, I won't ask you again. Who are you? I spoke slowly, articulating each letter that pooled out of my mouth. I watched with great satisfaction as his throat had bobbed up and down from a gulp. Sorry, my name is Liam, and I came here to ask for your help, he explained, looking me straight in the eye. I nodded slowly and turned to Tyler. Leave us, please, I ordered him with a swift nod to the two protection wolves. Instantly, they dropped the arms of the man and he crumbled to the floor before quickly regaining his posture. Tyler raised his eyebrows. Are you sure Alpha Reed? I glanced between him and Liam and nodded I could easily defeat him if necessary. Tyler nodded in understanding and without another word, swiveled on his heels and vanished into the thick of the forest, leaving me with the trespassers. Wow, you're quite scary for a hot chick. He chuckled, raising his eyebrows in admiration as I turned back to him. I narrowed my eyes a fraction, my face concealing any emotion to his inappropriate comment. What exactly is it you need my help with? I'm very busy and you trespassing on my territory is punishable by death, so quit wasting my time and give me a reason why I shouldn't kill you. Of course, I could never actually kill the man. He had done nothing wrong. However, as Alpha, I needed to scare off any trespassers that may actually want to harm my pack. You really are scary, he commented before quickly shaking his head. I was hoping you could help me find someone. A pleading and hopeful expression swiftly contorted his face. Who's this someone? I asked, curiosity eating away at me. My brother. I was abandoned as a child and went on a search for my family. By the time I had found them, they were all slaughtered except for my brother. I found out about him some years later and set off to find him. I believe he may be a member of your pack. My mind flooded with questions. However, I had no right to ask them, so instead, I asked the one I needed to know. Does your brother have a name? I thought over all the members of my pack, trying to figure out who he could be in relation to. His surname is Thorn. I don't know of his first name. He sighed and my jaw umbled open. Suddenly, everything clicked into place and I saw this man in an entirely different light. The charming personality and cocky attitude, the new traveler he had already called me, the identical bone structure with the sharp jawline and prominent cheekbones, the exact same muscular build and the piercing icy blue eyes I fell in love with at first sight. How could I have missed it? Liam obviously noticed my revelation as his eyes lit up. Do you know him? His voice dripped with hope and desperation. I know someone with the surname Thorn. I nodded. My voice came out in a low whisper, but he heard. Is there any way you could introduce them to me? Is there a possibility he could be my brother? There is a large possibility. His parents were murdered along with the rest of his pack. He is maybe a few years younger than you appear and you definitely look like brothers. I informed him. Come with me. Liam walked at my heels and not an inch further through the woods towards the house, and I could feel the hope and wishful thinking radiating off him. Alpha Reed, he whispered after a few moments. It took me a while to register that he was talking to me. It was always my father that answered that name. Yes, thoughts of Zach's reaction to Liam hammered in my mind. Somehow, I didn't imagine they would run into each other's arms and be happily reunited. What's his name? I hesitated for a second, but reluctantly spilled a bit of information. It's Zach. I could tell Liam was genuine and desperate to find his brother, so I didn't feel it was right to conceal information about his possible family. We finally reached the door to the house and my breath hitched in my throat. Zach had a brother. He had a family. I sincerely hoped that he didn't push all of that away. I pushed the door open with bated breath, and it didn't take long before he was bundling down the hallway like a bulldozer, trampling on everything in his path, eyes ablaze with fury and fists balled at his sides. Chapter 3, Who the hell are you? He snarled as he reached the end of the hallway and towered over me, facing off with Liam. His crystal eyes were glassed over with glacial rage. He glared at the man who had been so excited and had worked so hard to find him, and I saw Liam's sparkling eyes dim slightly at Zach's hostility. After not getting an answer, his glare snapped to me. Why the hell did I see Tyler and the others come back without you? He growled, narrowing the frost-coated orbs at me accusingly. Ah, that's why you're grumpy. I nodded in understanding before sighing. I sent them back. Instantly, his hand gripped my wrist aggressively. I told you to stay safe, not be left alone with a stranger who is trespassing on our territory. He sent me his signature daring look, warning me not to do it again. Sorry. I smiled and placed a gentle kiss on his lips before pulling away and turning to Liam. Zach, this is Liam. Liam, this is Zach. I introduced and then stepped back slightly, still in Zach's firm grip but out the way of their meeting. Who are you? Zach repeated curtly. You could still hear the hostility pouring from his voice, but it was a little less brash than before. I am. Liam trailed off and sent me a sheepish look. His eyes were pleading and desperate, and I felt pity swimming in my mind. Zach, I whispered gently, knowing this news was delicate and would change his whole life. This is Liam Thorne. I squeezed his hand comfortingly as I awaited his response. He fixated once again on Liam. I spat ice as they stared each other down. A cold silence froze the air and sent shivers over my spine. Suddenly, a sharp tug on my wrist sent me flying behind Zach, and next thing I knew, I was pushed up behind him. Who the hell sent you? He snarled. His deep voice was frosty and sharp, and I hadn't heard him sound this angry since my dad was killed. What? Liam, on the other hand, spoke quietly and his voice wavered. Who sent you? Zach demanded aggressively. Zach, I whispered, but it was pointless. Get out. He boomed after another span of silence. I don't know who you are, but if this was some attempt to get to Ella, you won't succeed. Get out. Liam was frozen in his place, watching his little brother have a fit before his face crumbled and the light in his eyes flickered off. He nodded gently and turned to trudge out the door, head hung low. I watched with tears brimming my eyes as he closed the door behind him, and soon his scent was fading. Zach's body stood, tense and firm in front of me before he snapped around to face me. Don't ever endanger yourself like that again, he warned, raising his eyebrows in his usual daring manner. Zach, my voice was barely a whisper, and I cut myself off, not knowing what to say. He had pushed his only family away because he was scared to let someone near me. The heartbreak on Liam's face after searching for years for Zach made my own heart shatter in my chest. He was a fraud, he demanded firmly, trying to convince himself as well as me. Was he? He looked just like you. The eyes, the face. He even acted like you, Zach. He called me sweetheart, for crying out loud. I laughed, holding his face in mine so he couldn't hide his emotions from me. He isn't my brother, he murmured back, fear ablaze in his eyes. The story fits. I shrugged. And if he was here to hurt me, he had his chance when I was alone with him. Instead, he just asked for help finding you. No, was all, he replied. Zach. It's okay to let someone in, I promised, placing a kiss on his lips and turning to walk away. I shut myself in the office, leaving Zach to sort out his thoughts and calm down a little when my phone rang once again. I checked the caller ID before pressing it to my ear. "Tyler," I called. "Everything okay?" "Not really. There are more wolves at the border, asking for you. They aren't quite as calm as the other was and they are putting up a fight. They have some, reservations about a female alpha," he informed cautiously, and I let out a sigh. "Okay, how many are there?" "We have 3 of them, but there is still one more, I think," he admitted reluctantly. I knew he had attempted to deal with this situation alone, and having failed to do so irritated him. "I will round up the last one. Can you get rid of the others or take them to the cells if necessary?" I instructed him before terminating the call. I found Zach leaning against the kitchen counters with a drink in his hand. "Hey," I smiled meekly. "I have some business to deal with." Instantly, his eyes snapped from his drink to my own and he narrowed them slightly. "What business?" "There are a few more wolves at the border," I admitted, and his sapphire eyes glazed yellow before fading back to blue. "I'm coming with you," he demanded, and I shook my head. "I will be fine. Tyler and 3 protection wolves are already there. I just need to oversee things." I bended the truth a little. He snarled and then flickered his eyes from the drink to me and back again. "Pull the same stunt as before and I swear to God." "I won't," I assured him, grasping his stubble-deep chin and planting a kiss on his lips. His sweet taste was overpowered by alcohol and his usual soft lips were dry and chapped. "Don't drink too much, please." "Okay," he agreed, snaking his arms around my waist and pulling me against him. "I love you," he hummed. "I love you too." I was soon racing to the border, desperate to deal with this and get back to Zach before he drowned himself in alcohol. I trudged through the woods, scanning my surroundings for anyone or anything unusual. A wolf scent lingered in the air, but the direction wasn't clear. I focused on it, blocking everything else in my mind. Soon, a trail of wolf wrapped around the trees surrounding me, not giving a clear idea as to where it ended. It was as if the wolf had done figures of 8 around the woods, weaving around the shrubs and deliberately masking its trail. And that's when I realized they had. It was an ambush. As if sensing my sudden revelation, 3 large figures emerged from amongst the thick of the trees. One directly in front of me, with shaggy blonde hair and illuminated amber eyes. His long pointed fangs bared viciously as he stalked towards me. Returning the aggression, I initiated the change and flashed my eyes a bright, simmering flame. My razor-sharp claws tore through my fingertips and pointed fangs burst through my gums. "Ella Reed," the man in the middle sneered, deliberately disobeying me by calling me Ella and not Alpha. My wolf unleashed a surge of dominance, knocking them back slightly, but they proceeded to prowl towards me, unbothered. I knew I could fight them off quite easily. I was stronger and faster than them, and with full dominance, I could make them cower beneath me. However, when the 2 at the side grasped my arms and hauled my back against the tree, I could do nothing but stare, gobsmacked as the middleman swiftly removed my shirt and began railing his grimy hands all over my topless body. I snarled and growled, but the man simply dismissed me and pressed his lips to the crook of my neck. His fangs grazed lightly over the left side of my neck before he quickly pulled away. "She's marked," he stated, his amber glowing eyes glaring into my own. I couldn't prevent the smirk as he studied the mark on my neck. The two deep tooth marks were spread far apart, covering the entire side of my neck. They showed not only Zach's size in there for his ability to fight, but his dominance. He had marked me as his, like I had marked him, and only someone who could produce a bigger mark would dare to touch what was his. However, after contemplating his options, he continued to pepper my neck with kisses while his sidekicks held me firmly in place. I was trapped. And then, I felt the fangs push through the flesh on my neck. Chapter 4. It was a threat, plain and simple. He had ignored Zach's mark and had marked me as his himself. Anger surged within me as his hands lowered slowly from my breasts to my shorts. His grubby hands delved down between the material and my skin while I struggled desperately to shake him off. My back was pressed firmly against a tree, and there was a wolf in front and one either side of me, blocking my escape. My hands were pinned to the side of the tree, and a heavy foot rested on each of mine, stopping me from kicking at them. Ever so slowly, he pulled his fangs out of my neck, blood dripping from them, and while I could tell it would scar, it would be barely noticeable compared to Zach's mark. His fangs were much smaller than Zach's, and the mark was nowhere near as deep. The hand that was down my shorts lowered further, curling round my thighs and cupping me. His free hand pressed firmly over my mouth, preventing me from biting and muffling my snarls and shouts. I winced as his fingers trailed lightly over the material of my underwear and his lips found the inside of my bra. Tears brimmed my eyes as I knew I couldn't get out of this. He could do whatever he wanted to me, and I couldn't stop him. Just as his hand flicked aside the material of my underwear, it was tore away from my body and his entire arm was twisted away from me. His neck snapped out of place and his body collapsed to the floor at my feet. The grip saw my arm loosen, and I didn't waste a second before turning to the one on my left, growling and barking at him. He backed away instantly, but I refused to let him off that easy. Beside me, Liam was caging the other man against a tree, snarling deeply at him as his eyes blazed. His claws reached his throat and rested lightly on his skin, threatening him but not harming him. I did the same with the man before me, placing one clawed finger to his windpipe and adding enough pressure to cut off his oxygen but not to tear through his skin. With the other hand, I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Tyler's number. After several rings, he answered. "Get here now?" I demanded, and with that, ended the call. Seconds later, he came charging through the woods, followed by the protection wolves. "Elle, what happened?" he asked, surveying the scene. I still remained topless, with small droplets of blood dripping from the holes in my neck. An unconscious man lay on the floor while Liam and I pinned the other two against nearby trees. "I thought you said there was only one," I hissed, pulling away from the man in front of me and allowing him to breathe. "I thought there was. I'm so sorry, Elle." He sounded sincere, and I knew Tyler wouldn't let me get hurt intentionally, so I took a few breaths and nodded. "Take all three of them to the cells. They can be a present to my boyfriend tomorrow." I watched as the two conscious wolves squirmed, their Adam's apples bobbing from the gulp. "Yes, Alpha Reed." One of my protection wolves, Sophie, nodded, and then she dragged the unconscious one away. The rest of them took hold of the other two, leaving me with Liam. I turned to him to witness his blazing eyes fade back into the beautiful icy blue color. He stared at me for a second, shifting from one foot to the other uncomfortably, and that's when I realized I was still topless. Instantly, I grasped my shirt and pulled it over my head, realizing all the protection wolves had seen my bra as well as Tyler. That was something I would be keeping from Zach. "Thank you." I smiled at him gratefully and he nodded. "No problem." He shrugged nonchalantly. No, really. Thanks. If you hadn't have come, I trailed off, not daring to think about what might have happened. He nodded in response. Are you okay? He nodded towards the tooth-shaped holes in my neck that were still oozing with blood. Yeah, it will barely leave a mark. I shrugged. You really going to let Zach have them? He laughed. It was a familiar laugh, a little deeper than Zach's throat-tight R, but familiar nonetheless. They deserve it. I grinned and then realized he would probably be worrying about now. I should go, but I owe you so. If there is anything you need or you want to stick around, let me know. I nodded and he smiled solemnly. Thanks, bud. I won't stay unless I am welcome. He explained, and I knew exactly what he was referring to. He came here for Zach, and the only reason he would stay was for him, okay? I nodded and turned to leave. Thoughts of Zach swam through my mind. I paused to turn back to Liam. He does know you're his brother. He will come around eventually. He thinks I am putting you in danger. Sadness swam in his eyes, and I felt pity for Liam. It seems to be his primal instinct. I rolled my eyes, making sure I am safe. When he realizes I am, he will come looking for you, so don't stray too far. I begged and he nodded. Let me walk you home. He more demanded than asked. I will be okay. I turned to leave again, but just like his brother, Liam was stubborn. I'm walking you home. In case there are more of them. Okay, I laughed, thanks. The two of us strode through the woods for a long while in silence, both deep in thought. So how come you were out alone? He asked me after a while. I am Alpha, you know. I don't need a babysitter. I laughed and he nodded. I noticed. But Zach doesn't seem like the type to just let you walk around alone. He raised his eyebrows expectantly. No, a few months ago, someone was after me and Zach killed him. But he still worries that he wasn't working alone or someone else will come after me. I explained, shrugging slightly. There was nothing I could do about Zach's protectiveness, and I knew he was just trying to keep me safe. And were they? Liam asked. I raised a questioning eyebrow and he continued. Working with the guy who was after you? I shook my head. No, they were just idiots. There are a lot of people who aren't particularly happy with a female alpha and feel the need to express that unhappiness. They weren't the first, and I'm sure they won't be the last. He nodded with a solemn expression on his face but kept quiet. We soon approached the house, and when we were about a meter from it, the door burst open. Zach's face was red with anger and his fists were clenched so tightly. His knuckles were white. What are you doing back here? He screamed at Liam, approaching him rather quick. Zach. It came out my lips as barely a whisper, but it was enough. His direction switched and soon his demeanor relaxed as he strode towards me. What happened? He demanded sternly, reaching out to me and pulling me against him. It was an ambush, I whispered, pulling away to see his glare snap to Liam. No, it wasn't him. He stopped them, I assured him, reaching for his chin to turn his attention back to me. Love and affection flooded into his eyes, washing away the anger as he looked at me. I melted in the hold of his eyes. Although they were icy and cold, they sent warmth surging through me. Suddenly they snapped back to an amber color, flames ablaze as they zoned in on my neck. What the hell is that? He seethed, tilting my head so he could assess the damage. They didn't exactly attack me in a violent sense. I mumbled as his whole body trembled with fury. They tried to mark you. His voice was more of a growl than speech. Where are they? In the cells. I thought you might want to deal with them. Now a new fire flickered in his eyes, lighting up his face. The adrenaline that comes with revenge fed his fire like fuel. They grew and danced in the orbs of his eyes. He pulled me against him once again, resting my head against the beat of his heart. I turned in his arms to face an uncomfortable-looking Liam. "Liam, thank you," I repeated, desperately needing him to know how grateful I was. "It's not a problem. I am going to go. See you," he mumbled, and I smiled bye. "Stay safe, okay?" he asked. "I will," I promised, and a smile crossed his face. "If you ever change your mind, you are always welcome here. I owe you a lot," I said. "Thanks," he muttered and then turned to leave. He trudged through the inner circle and approached the edge of the gardens. I glanced up at my boyfriend with an expression of pleading and expecting. Liam had now proven he wasn't a danger, so Zach had to believe him now. He frowned down at me and shook his head until Liam was far in the distance. His eyes were narrowed and staring daggers at me when he sighed. "Wait." I squeezed his hand in encouragement and smiled when I saw Liam halt across the village. "Stay." Liam twisted around on the spot to face us again, eyes wide and eyebrows high up his forehead. "What?" "Stay," Zach repeated. "You protected Ella and I owe you everything for that. So stay." "Really?" "Yes," was all he said before turning back inside. "Okay." Liam nodded regardless, a radiant smile lighting up his face. "You can stay with us until I find you a house," I offered, remembering how that worked out the last time. Chapter 5 Morning. Zach grinned devilishly as he sauntered into the kitchen the next morning. I sat at the counter with a cup of tea in my hands, scrolling through all of my messages from Tyler about what was happening in the pack and what I needed to do today. "Morning," I smiled, watching him grab the ingredients to make breakfast. "You're in a good mood." I raised my eyebrows at him. "I get to kill 3 people that laid their hands on you last night," he reminded me, smirking. His crystal eyes glazed over with fury for a few seconds, but the thrill of revenge swept it away instantly. I laughed as he moved around the kitchen, frying eggs and buttering toast. The aroma of cooking flooded the house, and I visibly drooled over not only the delicious smell, but his muscular back flexing as he worked. "Hey," Liam called as he entered the kitchen, taking a seat at the bar to my left. "Hey," I greeted politely, waiting for Zach to do the same. "Here." He handed me a plate of food before leaning over the counter and pressing his warm lips to mine. "Will you be okay?" he asked, flitting his eyes towards Liam and then back to me. "I will be fine." I sighed and rolled my eyes at him before taking another sip of my drink. He nodded hesitantly and turned to leave. "Have fun," I called. "Oh, I will." He laughed from the hallway. "I love you." "I love you too," I replied, and soon after he was closing the door. I turned to Liam, who sat beside me, awkwardly twiddling his thumbs. "Sorry, he will warm up to you," I chuckled, rolling my eyes. "It's okay. He left me alone with you." "That's a start, right?" He laughed back, shrugging slightly. "He isn't usually this much of an asshole," I told him, standing from my seat. "Did you want some breakfast?" I sighed, realizing Zach hadn't offered. Don't worry about it." I shook my head lightly and passed him my untouched plate. "Here." I rounded the counter and switched the stove back on. "Thanks. Can I ask you something?" Liam called as I retrieved another egg from the fridge. I cracked it into the saucepan and then turned back to him. Sure. I nodded and he hesitated. Are they your parents? He nodded towards the photo of them on the counter. My dad had his arm slung around my mom's shoulder and she was leaning into him, taking the photo. In the background was a beach and the sky was a clear blue. It was my favorite picture of them. My mom looked as stunning as ever with her long waves shaping her face. Her wide smile spread, making small dimples in her cheeks. Her bright blue eyes reflected her happiness, and they were gazing lovingly into my dad's. My dad held her protectively. His muscular arms held her against him, and his broad shoulders were squared, ready to fight off anything that approached her. He was also smiling brightly, looking relaxed and peaceful in her arms. His eyes were glazed over with the clear love and admiration he had for her. Yeah, they are. I nodded with a smile. I have trespassed here before. He chuckled and I snapped my focus from the toast I was buttering to him. What? Yeah. I was adopted by humans and then when I started to transform, I ran away. I sort of figured out the whole werewolf thing alone and then started to search for my family. I accidentally trespassed here and met your dad. He explained and then shifted his gaze from the photo to me. Nice guy. He laughed. I bet. You're still alive though, and I assume my mom had something to do with that. I laughed and he nodded. Yeah? Your dad kind of threatened to kill me and your mom slapped him and was yelling at him to leave me alone. She convinced him and then helped me track my parents down. She pointed me in the right direction and answered my questions, he explained. We were silent for a while, both thinking over the memories of my parents. I met you, he stated after a while. Really? I questioned and he nodded. Yeah, you were probably 5 or 6. You were playing with dolls. He laughed and then narrowed his eyes at me. You ripped their heads off. I burst out laughing at the memory and nodded. Yes, I used to pretend they were vampires and would pull their heads off and show my dad that I could fight vampires. Where are your parents? He asked quietly. My mom was taken when I was 7 and I don't know exactly when she was killed, but I think it was recently. And my dad was killed a few months ago. I told him and he scrunched his eyebrows. By who? The same person 𝐿 murdered to protect me. I told him, sitting beside him to eat my now cooked breakfast. I'm sorry, he whispered softly. I'm sorry you never got to meet your parents, I replied. I'm sure they were great. I think not knowing them is better than becoming attached and then losing them. I guess. But don't you think it's better to be loved for a short time than for no time at all? I asked and he shrugged. Maybe. I feel lucky to have ever gotten to know my parents. I just wish they knew I was okay. When my dad died, he had no idea about my relationship with Zach. He doesn't know that I am okay and that I am not alone. I sighed. Of course he knows. A voice called from the hallway and I turned to see 𝐿𝐴𝐸 walk into the kitchen. What? I narrowed my eyes at him and then they flitted to his deep crimson-stained hands. I couldn't help but cringe at the liquid that coated his skin like armor. He knew we were together, sweetheart. He knows you have me. He placed a kiss on my cheek before heading to the sink to wash the blood off his hands. He did. Of course he did. And you're alive. I gasped in complete shock. Yeah, well, only as long as I make you happy and don't break your heart. He rolled his eyes and then dried his hands on the towel next to him. Have you cooked? He scrunched his eyebrows at me. Yeah, well, someone had to be polite and make Liam breakfast. I scolded, rolling my eyes. Sweetheart, you left the stove on. He rolled his eyes and switched it off before turning back to me. I told you not to cook unless I was in the house. You could have killed the both of you. He chuckled, rounding the counter and snaking his arms around me. I nudged him in the ribs and turned in his arms to face him. So, what did you do to them? Well, the one that dared to do that, he indicated towards the small scar on my neck. I dug my claws into his eyes and shredded his brain. He stated, and I nearly threw up over the front of his shirt. Nice one. Liam laughed next to me while I buried my head in his shirt. The image of his fingers plunged deep into the guy's eyeballs flashed in my mind. Yeah, I was proud of that one. Slow and painful, he boasted. I've never done it before, and I must admit it felt weird on my fingers. I think I still have a bit of his brain under my nails. Zach, stop. I whined, not wanting to hear how he violently murdered people. I was all for standing up for myself and never back down from a fight, but that didn't mean watching people die came easily, especially when their death was particularly gory. They were asking for it, baby. He chuckled, kissing the top of my head. What about the other two? Liam asked, shuffling to the edge of his seat to listen intently to the answer. Ripped their windpipes. He shrugged, bored. The assholes had it coming. Liam laughed while I clung tighter to Zach's shirt, trying to get the images of distorted eyeballs and torn brains out of my head. Baby, you are the alpha of the pack. You are going to have to kill people. He chuckled, running his fingers through my hair soothingly. Not piercing their eyes with my claws, I argued with a pout, making them both laugh. The two spoke about torture methods for a while I clamped my hands over my ears. Realizing that they were actually getting along, I pulled away to face Zach again. I have to work for a bit, I told him, slipping off the stool and walking towards the door. See you guys later. Chapter 6. Hey, I called the next morning as I descended the stairs. Zach stood, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed over his lean chest. Hey, beautiful. He stepped towards me to place a kiss on my forehead before leading me into the kitchen. Breakfast. Actually, Ryder texted me saying they were all at the cafe if we wanted to join. They are having breakfast, I explained, sending him my best pleading eyes. Sounds good to me. He smiled, one of those that radiated happiness through the room. He gazed at me lovingly and my heart turned to dust in my chest. Great. We can invite Liam, I told him, and was extremely grateful that my voice didn't waver as I spoke. Really? He groaned, agonizing. Zach. I sent him a warning look. He's your brother and he came looking for you. Be nice. He rolled his eyes and sighed. I'll go get him. I grinned victoriously as he disappeared into the hallway. Hey, stranger. Ryder pulled me into a bear hug as soon as we stepped into the cafe. He threw his arms around my waist and I buried my face in his neck. Missed you too. I laughed, pulling away to see his grinning face. He scooted back into the booth that they had chosen, a bigger one than our regular, as it was getting a little cramped. Mason sat in the corner with his arms tightly wrapped around Caroline, who lay across his chest. They both looked so happy, and I was glad that they could be together now that my dad wasn't there to interfere, even if I wished it wasn't the case. Beside Caroline, Jordan sat with a mug of hot chocolate. Her eyes lit up ecstatically as I slid into the booth on the opposite side, and her smile warmed the room. Hey, Elle. She beamed and then turned to Zach. Hey, Jord. We both replied, curling up in the corner opposite Mason and Caroline. Alexia sat beside Jordan, and then Ryder sat on a chair at the end. Where's Blake? I asked them and they all nodded towards the counter where Blake was paying for some drinks. "Who is that?" Alexia gasped as Liam joined us, a huge cocky smirk on his face as the girls fixated on him and drooled slightly. "This is Liam," Zach explained, turning to his brother. "He's my brother. He admitted my being to my seat." "I didn't know you had a brother," Jordan gasped slightly, still admiring Liam in great detail. "Neither did I," Zach laughed. Blake reappeared with a handful of drinks and handed us one each. "Thanks, Blake." I grinned as he pushed a mug of steaming hot chocolate towards me. "So you have a brother?" he asked Zach, sitting beside Liam. "Apparently so." He nodded just as Liam began snarling from beside him. I turned to see his glowing amber eyes fixed on Mason and let out a huff. "Liam. He's okay," I snapped as Zach pulled him back into his seat. He snapped his head towards me and growled slightly. "He is human," he reminded me. "And I said he's okay?" I snarled, releasing a wave of dominance over him. He resisted momentarily before leaning back in his seat and letting out a small huff of annoyance and giving up. Before anyone could speak again, the waitress brought over several plates of breakfast. She placed two in front of Mason and Caroline and pushed one towards me before disappearing at the room. "Are you coming back to school soon, Elle?" Jordan asked me hopefully. Zach's hand found mine and gave it a gentle, comforting squeeze. He knew I had been struggling with the decision. Now that I was alpha of the pack, it was important for me to be there at all times, and I didn't want the pack to think I wasn't committed. But I enjoyed being away from the pack and spending time with my friends, and I was only a few months away from finishing. I spoke to Tyler and he offered to fill in as almost a part-time alpha while I am in school, and if I am desperately needed he will text me, I told her, nodding while another waitress brought 3 more plates. Blake quickly ordered an extra once he realized they hadn't anticipated Liam being here. "So you will be back tomorrow?" Ryder asked me and I nodded, a mouthful of delicious salty bacon swarming my mouth. "Yep," I replied once I had swallowed. "What about you, Zach? Are you coming back?" Mason asked him and I couldn't help the feeling of loss that surged through me. "Nah, I don't need to protect Hella anymore, and it's probably not a good idea since they might find out my age," he explained, shrugging. "How would they find out?" Jordan asked, repeating the argument I had been having with him over the past few weeks. "I don't know, but they might." He simply shrugged and curled an arm tightly around me, obviously knowing what was pinging about in my head right now. We all ate our breakfast quietly, only engaging in light chit-chat every now and then. After nearly an hour of being at the cafe, we opted to head back to the pack. We trudged through the woods, Zach's arm slung around my waist, holding me close to him while Mason and Caroline strolled hand in hand at the front. The others all chatted between themselves until we all stopped abruptly. "What?" Mason asked, whirling around to see us all frozen. "Can you guys smell that?" Jordan barely whispered. Tears were brimming her moss-green eyes and her skin was as white as a sheet as besought quietly. "Smell what?" Mason snapped impatiently while we all nodded in response to Jordan. "Blood?" I told him, panicked. I ripped out of Zach's arms and raced towards the part of the village the scent was originating from. With each thumping step on the forest floor, snapping twigs and crunching leaves, the aroma grew more powerful and more sickly. The sweet scent of fresh blood made my stomach flip and my palms sweat with anxiousness. I could hear my friends close behind me, also charging towards whatever danger there was. After what felt like hours of anticipation, We all finally emerged out of the forest, and I stormed ahead through the streets of the village. Screams and shouts echoed through the valley, and a high-pitched squawking scream rang out over all of them, clanging the alarm bells in my head. Once I reached the origin of the screams, my entire body froze. The sweat poured from my palms and my heart raced frantically in my chest while the oxygen stopped flowing. Before me, two large wolves were attacking each other violently while swarms of people surrounded them. The shouts and screams halted, and silence resonated through the village as I approached the scene. Fury built up within me, boiling my blood and scalding my veins as a fiery pit of anger surged through me. My usually moss-green eyes flashed a burning amber, glowing in the sunlight. Enough, I roared, releasing a surge of dominance over the pack. Frozen, icy shards of power attacked them all, freezing them in place. The two wolves that were my target cowered at my feet, slowly shifting back into their human form. I instantly recognized the one wolf as Greg, a kind elderly man who lived on the outskirts of town. A few months ago, he had broken into my house and written a threat on my floor with blood in order to protect his daughter. Therefore, despite his wrongdoings, I had taken a liking to this man. The other wolf, I immediately knew, was the one that initiated the fight. He was notoriously known for breaking and bending any rules and was constantly on my father's bad side. I had decided to give him a fresh start once I was announced as Alpha. However, one of my rules for fighting amongst the pack was strictly forbidden, and unless there was a good reason, the one who initiated the fight was to be executed. I glowered at the two wolves threateningly, examining them both for signs of injury. That's when I realized they were both unharmed, meaning the fight had only just begun. The stench of blood was prominent here, so my eyes began scanning the scene for the source. And that's when they fell upon the lifeless body near the edge of the circle the crowds had formed. The small figure lay limp, and gallons of blood pooled around them, drowning them. Chapter 7. My breathing faltered entirely. The girl was dead. There was no denying it. Her chest stayed steady, still. Soon the realization of her identity flooded through my mind like a tidal wave, crashing over every other thought and destroying it in an instant. Every doubt was submerged and drowned by the revelation, and my heart shattered into a million pieces. She was Greg's daughter, the one he fought so hard to save. I dragged the pieces of my heart and forced them back together momentarily and turned to the scene before me. "Tyler, take them to the square," I ordered in an instant. He was dragging Greg's opponent away with Sophie, while the other two protection wolves, Josh and Dave, hauled Greg away. Gradually, the crowd and his people raced to get to the square to get a front row view. As soon as the last person left, I collapsed at the girl's side, guilt eating away at me. Tears flooded down my cheeks, staining them with salty water. I grasped her cold, white hand in my own, and with the other, flitted her beautiful gray eyes closed. I felt a sudden warmth beside me before I was encircled in a pair of strong arms and thrust against a beating heart. I sunk against Zach's chest, clinging to every shred of warmth and comfort he provided while my hand was still closed around the girl's own cold, dead fingers. "There was nothing you could have done," he whispered, detaching my hand from hers and pulling it to him, warming it with his body heat. "I am supposed to protect the pack," I snivel-led. "I should have been there, attacking this man before he could hurt her, but instead, I was caught up in my own world having breakfast." "It wasn't your fault," Zach promised, but it didn't shake the nauseous feeling that swirled around with the guilt in my stomach. I didn't have the energy to argue, so instead, sunk deeper into his hold and curled my body tighter, seeking his warmth and security. In the distance, voices from the pack reached my ears and the nausea grew. She isn't fit to be alpha. She is too soft. Like her mother. A deep voice grumbled. Behind me, snarls and barks sounded, and I knew that they had all heard what I heard. I agree. She will probably give them second and third chances. Her father would have torn them both to shreds without showing any mercy. The other chuckled softly, as if reminiscing about when my dad was alpha. Ignore them, Zach hissed in my ear. You are the perfect combination of both of them. Your mom and your dad. He assured me, and right then and there, all I wanted to do was remain in his hole for the rest of our lives. But sadly, that wasn't possible. So instead I pulled myself together and pushed away from Zach's hold into my own defeat. With one last look at the lifeless body on the floor, I turned on my heels and directed my stride towards the square. The shouts and chatter died down to a few whispers and hushes as I stepped up on the stage and turned to the two men. Both had their hands strung above their heads with silver cuffs clasped around their wrist. One slight movement or resistance and the silver would simmer through their skin. I cleared my throat slightly to remove the lump that had formed, and caught everyone's attention. Who initiated this fight? I asked them loud and clear, making sure to release a small blast of dominance. After a moment's silence, I finally got my answer. I did, Greg admitted, shame and hatred dripping from his voice. I narrowed my eyes at him momentarily, shocked by his answer, before nodding why. He raised his head to look me straight in the eyes and raised his brows. I think you already know that, Alpha Reed. He sighed. The utter despair was like a tsunami over the crowds, and soon tears stung everyone's eyes. I was about to ask him to tell me, when I realized why he hadn't. It was too hard. Once you say it out loud, it's real. I knew that as well as anyone. Sometimes it's easier to deny it than to admit they are really and truly gone. So I turned to the other man. Why did you do it? I snarled, eyes flashing and claws itching to tear into his throat. He held me to, and he told me he would have it for next week. He shrugged and I narrowed my eyes, wondering where this was going. I wanted it now, but he had to pay for his daughter to go on a school trip, so I helped him out. Beside him, Greg snarled and thrashed into chains, searing his wrists in the silver. Help me. You killed her, he screamed, fury and hate radiating off him. Enough, I ordered before he scorched the rest of his skin off and bled out right there on the stage. I turned my attention back to the murderer, who made me feel sick just looking at him. There was a twinkle in his eye as he looked back at me, and it became blatantly clear that he didn't kill because of money. This was to prove a point. He was another that didn't believe in me. Didn't think I was strong enough to lead just because I was a female. The idea that he could hurt an innocent child and go to the extent of murder just to imply that I was weak sent rage through my wolf into desperation to claw his neck. I do not tolerate any kind of violence amongst pack members, I voiced, articulating each word slowly and clearly, looking him square in the eyes. You are to be executed. His face dropped and his cocky smirk swept away like a speck of dust beneath a broom. His jaw fell open slightly and his dark, hazel green eyes widened infinitely. What? He gasped like he was drowning and had come up for air. You aren't going to give me a second chance. I stared at him gobsmacked for a second, taken aback by the fact he actually believed I was that weak. You will receive no mercy from me, I replied, turning away from him and towards Greg. I also do not tolerate fighting. I made that very clear when I took over from my father. I know, he admitted, hanging his head and avoiding eye contact. There were other ways to deal with the situation. I told him and he nodded. I know. I wasn't thinking straight. He sighed, tears welling in his eyes. The next time you initiate a fight with a pack member, I won't hesitate to kill you, I told him and then turned to Tyler. Let him go. Greg stared at me with a similar expression to that which I received when I sentenced the murderer to death. You're letting me go, he stuttered. Out a warning. It better not happen again, I warned as he stumbled out of the chains and towards his crumbling wife who stood at the front with a tear-stained face. I turned to the two who embraced each other comfortingly. I'm sorry for your loss. If there is anything I can do, let me know. They smiled gratefully and then returned to holding each other. My heart tore apart as the thoughts of what they were feeling right now attacked my mind. I couldn't imagine the pain and torture of losing a child. Alpha? Tyler's voice snapped me back to the still strung-up killer who was now as white as a sheet yes. How will he be executed? He asked me, glancing between the man and me. I stared for a few moments, wondering whether I should simply sink my claws into his throat, or his heart. Whether I should get Zach to do the same as he did to the creep who marked me and let him dig his claws into his soft eyeballs. That idea was quickly disregarded when I realized firstly the pack would think I was weak if I didn't do it myself, and secondly, I would have to watch and I might throw up on my boyfriend. He didn't deserve a quick and easy death. Not after what he did and who he killed. Greg's daughter was young, maybe 10 years old, and still had a life ahead of her. The image of her blood-coated body returned to my mind and brought tears to my eyes as I turned to look at the killer. Hang him in the middle of the square. He can starve to death, I decided, knowing it was a long, slow process and the silver chains around his throat would make it painful. Gasps of shock resonated through the crowds, whether they were because I was being too soft or too harsh. I didn't know. I turned to take in every surprised face with wide eyes, eyebrows and parted jaws. Anyone who approaches him and tries to give him food or water will be joining him immediately, I declared, and with that, turned to leave.